My name is Victor Derfer, and today I would like to try to explain about creativity, particularly how creativity is seen in the knowledge era. The truth is that we have never seen the creative process. So creativity in terms of creating something, we have never seen it, nobody has seen it. But what we have seen are two things. One is the person who is doing the creativity, so the creator, and the other part is the creative product. So what we can do is that we can look into those creative people and try to figure out what makes them creative. And this is exactly what Howard Gardner did in his book Creating Minds, when he was looking at some incredibly creative people and basically processed their whole life material. And one of the favorites is Mozart, who you can see on the picture. In this lecture, I derived the notion of creativity from creation. So it is creating something that did not exist before. And therefore, those who can create these kind of things, they are the creators. And we have these creative products, which are very difficult to judge. So in the management literature, we mostly look at the outcome of creativity, and we try to figure out what makes them creative and so on, and therefore to find out with hindsight what was the creative process all about. Let's see how we can take a bit apart these two notions. I'm using Charles Handy's notion of the new alchemist here, and that is a metaphor for the creative people, which I find beautiful because the alchemists, long time ago, they were trying to do two things. One was to discover the philosopher's stone, and the other is to make gold. Now, the philosopher's stone is also gold on the spiritual level according to their teachings, but basically what they were doing, they were creating something valuable from nothing or non-valuable things. So what are these people like who can do that? On the picture you see 17 Nobel laureates who I have interviewed a couple of years ago in like more than an hour on average in-depth unstructured interviews, trying to figure out how these incredible people think. It is not only based on my interviews, obviously, it is mostly based on the literature what I'm going to tell you about. A very important characteristic of these creative people is that they are never happy with the usual way of seeing things. They are never happy with how things are. They always want to change something. It also means that they are always seeing things differently than others. And that makes them a bit strange, and they are not very easily fitting into usual well-structured organizations where everyone has their task and so on, because they are these like very strange individuals. What is also different about them is that they are not happy with the normal things, but they are happy to be insecure. They are happy to be vague. They are happy to be lost. Why? Because that's when they can find new ways. That's when they can create something. Basically, rejecting the existing is setting the scene for creating something new. And they are also very strange in terms of what they believe in, what they are faithful for. The first thing, obviously, is being faithful to their vision and to their creations. It is incredibly important because the newly created something is always something that did not exist before. It is always something that makes things different. Basically, it is usually rejected. Usually, people don't like it. They need to defend this vision, and only believing in something that will happen at the end of that creative process and going towards it driven by this faith, that's what enables them to actually accomplish their creations. It is also very important that they are faithful to their craft or discipline, or depending on in which field they are. It means that the physicists, for example, many of these Nobel laureates you can see there are physicists. And I talked to them, all of them are still in love with physics. Martin Pearl, who is 86 years-ish old, he said that the only thing that he is regretting from his life is that he was not doing a bit more physics. I mean, he spent his life doing physics. So how could he done more of that? And all these people are in love with their disciplines. Each of them said that they can barely wait in the morning to get out from their bed to get at their workplace so that they can continue working on their creative ideas. That kind of motivation seems to be absolutely essential for the creative people. And this also raises a very interesting question for the organizations. If these people are so incredibly loyal to their disciplines and to their vision, what about their organizational loyalty? Are they going to stay with their organizations? Well, some of them are loyal, some of them less, the same way as the less creative people. But if they have to choose between their calling, between their discipline and their organization, they will never choose the organization. They will always be with their vision and with their discipline. Being creative requires an incredible courage. It means that those creative people will constantly face all sorts of obstacles. Obviously, if it would be so easy to be creative, everyone would be creative, and we can see that not everyone is creative, especially not remarkably creative. They dare to be different. I said that they see things differently, and they also act on seeing things differently, which means that they have to dare to be different. They have to emphasize this thing being different. And that means that, for example, what George Bernard Shaw said, that reasonable people adapt themselves to the world. Unreasonable people try to adapt the world to themselves. This is what creative people try to do. And George Bernard Shaw says, therefore, all development depends on unreasonable people. So we can safely say that creative people are unreasonable. They are also questioning the normal ways of doing things. It links very closely when I said that they don't accept the obvious, the usual, the mediocre, and so on. So they are questioning sometimes the bare foundations of their own disciplines. And that's why, for example, to all of these guys on the picture, not only to the physicists, also to the economists, to the chemists, and so on, Einstein is one of the great heroes. Why is Einstein a hero? Because he dared throwing away the only two things in the physics of his time that was considered stable, the space and the time. Even Einstein said that it felt as if someone had pulled the floor under one's feet. So he left the only two things. He was left without anything to hold on. Now this is what creative people need to face all the time. And of course they need to face rejection very frequently from the less understanding people. The second entity that I mentioned was the creative idea. Now what is important that as we are in the knowledge economy, we are always identifying creativity or the creative outcome with the creation of new knowledge. And if you would take apart all creativity, there you would always find new knowledge as a component of it. What is this new knowledge like? Well, there are some definitions about what does it mean to be creative. And these outcomes, the creative idea is supposed to be original, so new, something that did not exist before. And they often say useful. I prefer to say potentially useful because it depends obviously how you, what do you mean by being useful. If useful means includes, for example, feeling happier, if useful includes better understanding of the world, then with all this, it is acceptable. But unfortunately, we often try to measure the usefulness in terms of pounds or dollars, and that is definitely not what creativity is about. The easy way to understand creativity is through what we call lateral thinking. Lateral means that it is not in the mainstream, it is somewhere on the side. So it is like out of the main thinking thought. It is the same in that sense as telling jokes. So the creative process starts from the mainstream and then takes a leap outside the mainstream, somewhere which cannot be seen from the mainstream. That's why other people have never seen it. But once you are there in that lateral stream, you can look back and you can explain how all that fits together, how the new thing that you just created makes sense. It is exactly the same as with the jokes. That's why we are laughing at jokes, because we are in the mainstream of thinking, then we jump out, but it all makes sense with the hindsight, just it is something that we did not think of, because it is not part of the mainstream, it is not something that we can see through convergent thinking, which would be the thinking in the mainstream. So that's why the jokes are so incredibly good examples. Of course, if you land it somewhere that does not make sense, that would mean that you cannot connect it back to the mainstream. So it is just a stupid idea, not a creative one. How about these two ideas that you can see on the picture? Both of them could be regarded as useless, idiotic, and so on. Of course, if you put that poor fish in the light bulb, it will die very soon because there will not be too much oxygen after a while. How about that bicycle? They have tried actually this as a thought experiment. No, real experiment. They gave the picture to various people to see whether it is good for anything. What is very interesting is that all adults said that it is a useless thing. There is no way to use that device for anything. And there were children not overtrained in our schools who said, well, if you would have this kind of surface, you could actually drive that bicycle and you could not drive the normal one. How can you get to these kind of ideas? I don't mean the fish one, I mean the creative ideas. Karl Popper says that it is necessary to have a creative intuition as part of this thinking process in Bergson's sense, basically that it is intuition which you cannot justify at the moment when it appears. Now, this also means that the creative process cannot be replicated. You cannot get to the same result the same way because nobody knows what the way was. This does not mean that you should not be able to explain the creative result. Of course, it is a bit like explaining the joke. People can understand it, but nobody would laugh afterwards. So when you explain the creative idea, it will make sense, but it will appear as if it was part of the mainstream, as if it could be reached in some sort of analytical, rational, sensible sort of way. Yet it seems that it cannot be. See you in a couple of minutes.